Hello, my name is Donna Kane, and I'm the Executive Director of the Peace Liard Regional Arts Council. I would like to begin by expressing our gratitude to Treaty 8, on whose territory we reside and work. It's my great privilege to introduce Lorna Crozier to Wild Words North. An officer of the Order of Canada, Lorna's contributions to Canadian literature, her teaching, and her mentoring have been acknowledged with 5 honorary doctorates. Her many books have received national awards, including the Governor-General's Award for Poetry. Lorna's contributions and generosity have been felt here in Northeast BC ever since she first came to read in 1999, and she's been up several times since then. She has inspired us to create our own literary communities, and I know it's fair to say that there is no poet more loved by our region than Lorna. Today, Lorna is going to be reading from her new memoir, Through the Garden. It is a powerful story of a marriage, of the impacts of grief, and the prevailing importance of poetry. After the reading, Lorna will be joined with Stephen Price for a Q&A. Stephen is an award-winning novelist and poet whose most recent book, Lampedusa, was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Welcome, Lorna.
Thank you, Donna. I wish I could be in Dawson Creek and Fort St. John, that wonderful Peace River country, in person. I always love being there, but this is the next best thing, I guess. I will imagine the people who have become my friends from that place in this room with me. The book is nonfiction prose, but it is interspersed with poetry. So I'm going to begin and end my short reading with a poem. This first one is the introduction to the manuscript. Poem me. I came to him that first night and said, poem me, and he did. He came to me that first night and said, poem me, and I did. Of our hours we made a poem, of our years we made a poem. Many things happened in between. Many things were rubbed out, repeated, neglected, ignored, stained, thrown away. But this morning he said, poem me. This morning I said, poem me. And we made of our lives a poem. The other illness that nearly destroyed Patrick and me along with him was alcoholism. When his drinking became more important than anything else, about 15 years into our lives together, I began to write him letters, though we lived in the same house and the studies where we worked were side by side. Talking to him wasn't doing any good. He wasn't hearing my angst, my despair, the devastating feeling that I'd have to go or ask him to leave. Besides, I'd always end up crying, and the conversation, was it ever a conversation, would blubber to a stop. My recurring theme was that if he loved me enough, he'd stop drinking. Wasn't that what it was all about? Love? That's the plea I kept returning to in the letters I'd leave on his desk in the morning. I had, even in my late 40s, the naive belief that love could cure anything. How could I have lived that long and held on to such a simple, happy ever after equation, like some little girl playing with princess dolls, like some heroine in a sappy romance? A few months of twice-a-week Al-Anon meetings convinced me there was nothing I could do to drag him out of drunkenness and into sobriety. The pull of addiction was stronger than any feelings for anyone, a child, a spouse, a parent. It was stronger than honesty, integrity, self-respect, stronger than the need to pay the bills, stay out of jail, stay married, stay cogent, stay on the road, stay alive. If he was going to stop, he had to do it for himself, not for me. He had to have his own reason. Something inside him had to become fierce enough to climb above the roar of addiction deep in his belly and survive. Once, in the middle of the night, I looked up to see him standing at the end of our bed, silhouetted in the light from the bathroom. As much to himself as to me, he said, "You know, if I have to choose between being sober and being a poet, I'll choose to be sober." I was stunned. What a Faustian cost. The genius of his writing was surely equivalent to the value of a soul. His addiction was killing him. He couldn't be a whole person if he continued drinking. Yet he'd written all of his books with a bottle and a pack of cigarettes on his desk. Booze was his inspiration. It swung open the gate to poetry's truths and insights, its linguistic dazzle and daring. Patrick got sober, he told me months later, because he decided to live. I don't know what it was that tilted him toward death and then away from it, but I do remember the morning he left for treatment. His sponsor, a stocky female probation officer dressed in an aqua sweatshirt and matching pull-on pants, met him at our front door where he waited with a small suitcase. He'd be gone for at least 6 weeks, resident at a rehabilitation center about 2 hours away on the outskirts of Nanaimo. I had to get a loan from the bank to pay the fees. I choked through a short goodbye, not knowing if he'd dry out, if he'd want to come home at the end of his stay, or who he'd be if he did. His sponsor gave me a big hug and said, "Honey, things are going to get better." Then, after Patrick slid into the passenger side of her car, she returned to the step where I was standing and added, "I'll be back, if that's okay with you, to check the house for bottles." He told me he threw them out, I said. I believed him. "I'll be back this afternoon." There was no messing around with her. Thank God Patrick was in her hands. Before I learned my Al-Anon lessons, among them that I couldn't control his drinking, some nights after he'd gone to bed, I searched the yard and house for booze. He'd sworn that he'd quit, but all my antennae were quivering. Over the years, he'd substituted brandy and port for scotch, his favorite, thinking because he liked them less, he wouldn't drink as much. A friend of ours did the same with gin, exchanging it for his favorite spirit, Screech, but he died of drinking just the same. Finally, Patrick ended up with vodka because its smell on his breath was harder to detect. I'd find the empties and half-filled bottles behind the books on his shelves, under the towels in the linen cupboard, stacked between chunks of firewood in the woodpile, under the seat in his truck, and tucked in the ivy that climbed the outdoor chimney. My moments of triumph were short-lived. "Aha!" I'd say to myself in the dark of the garden, clad only in my red flannel nightgown. I'd sit on the step with the proof in my hands and not know what to do, what to say to him in the morning. It had all been said before. As his sponsor got behind the wheel, I heard her say, "I hope you peed. We're not stopping till we hit the treatment center." There was no way she was going to allow him to be alone, even for a few moments in a gas station men's room. Who knew where he could have hidden a bottle? He tricked me endless times, tucking a flat Mickey under his sweater in the small of his back, the belt on his jeans holding it tight, as we headed off for an evening together. Even if I hugged him, which I often did, I couldn't feel it. Patrick's brilliant memoir, There Is a Season, about his road to recovery, included his weeks in treatment, but before he started writing it, we co-edited an anthology about addiction. We didn't send out a call for essays. Instead, we asked authors whom we admired, many of them friends, if they create a nonfiction piece about their battles with alcohol or cigarettes or heroin. Those close to them knew about their substance abuse, but it wasn't public knowledge. Some of them were clean and sober, others not. A few turned us down, but among the 10 writers who agreed were David Adams Richards, Peter Zosky, Stephen Reed, and Marnie Woodrow. We thought we needed to match the courage with our own, so Patrick and I wrote essays too, him about his drinking days, and me about my struggles with them. A week after his sponsor dropped him off at the treatment center, she asked me to meet her for coffee. She'd just come from work at the probation office and was dressed in a navy blue suit jacket with matching pants. The conservative look was challenged by her hair, the yellow of a crossing guard's vest. I waited for her to start the conversation. She leaned toward me across the booth and clutched both my hands. There was no escaping her. "Why do you think so little of yourself?" she asked. "Why are you not getting hold of your life?" I had expected sympathy from her, perhaps admiration for my perseverance, my weepy support of my partner. Not a challenge that left me shaken. A kind of love. You can see it in my graduation photograph. "Your daddy's little girl," he said, his arm heavy around my shoulders, his face too naked, a sloppy smile sliding to one side. I held him up. Mom tied his shoes. His love made me ashamed. Some days I felt protective, his hangdog look at breakfast when no one talked to him but me, sugar spilling from his spoon. "Don't tell Mom," he'd say on Sundays when he took me boating, sunk his third empty in the lake. At home, she fried a chicken in case he didn't catch a fish, waited and kept things warm. Even so, he died too soon. Now I wait for you, as if you've spent a summer afternoon in waves of wind and sunlight. I know you've hidden a bottle somewhere upstairs in your room. So far, I've stopped myself from looking, though I can't find what to do. More and more, I'm Daddy's little girl in pot de soie, my first long dress, its false sheen, a wash of blue. When you lean into me, the same looks on your face as in the photograph, your smiles undone. Among the other things it could be named, this too is love, the kind I'm most familiar with, the weight I claim I cannot bear, and do.
Laura, it is such a pleasure to be here with you, wherever here is. I want to thank you for this memoir. It is gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. I finished reading it late at night. The kids were asleep as he was asleep, and I was so moved and so stunned by it. I had to get up and I had to keep walking from room to room in the house, in this dark house with these sleeping people around me, just trying to process it, trying to put it all together in my head. It was really, really powerful writing. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you. And I know that one of the reasons you might have been particularly moved by it is that you knew Patrick well, and you were one of Patrick's favorite students. I know you met him when you were, 18, and me shortly after. So I'm pleased that you hopefully got a sense of him in the pages of the book.
It's so true. It's so true how the book is with him and with you. It was very revealing. I've known you almost 25 years now, a long time.
Yes.
Patrick was my first teacher in poetry. In that very first poetry workshop, I met you in the third week when you came in and you subbed for him. You took a class and you just moved everybody. You blew everyone away with the way you talked about poetry, the way you approached poetry, which felt in so many ways parallel to what Patrick did, the way he thought about poetry, but was so completely your own understanding of the art. And it really meant a lot to all of us, I think, when we were young poets, to see two separate, distinct, but complementary readings of the art of poetry. And so much about the two of you, for me at that time, felt so much like that. I can remember having dinners at your house. I was I don't know, 20, 21 years old. And I remember drinking wine, sitting around on the couches in this dim living room in the old house, with the garden outside, and this wall of poetry books. This wall of poetry books just looming in the shadows.
And do you remember for those dinners too, one of us, I think usually me, would say, let's hear some new poems.
Yes.
And ask you and Essie to read the work you were involved with at the moment, and Patrick and I would read. And I wanted the memoir. I'm not quite sure what to call it, if memoir is the right word or not, but I wanted one of the characters to be poetry, because that definitely was a third figure in Patrick's and my life together. Probably would have been had we not met each other. He might have married a orthodontist and I might have married a plumber. I don't know. But the fact that the two of us were equally passionate about finding the best words in the best order, that we were equally passionate about living our lives as poets together without one of us being in the shadow of the other. I wanted that to be a major part of this book, of this writing.
And it comes through. It comes through everywhere in the book. It's interesting. One of the things that Essie and I really learned from you guys, there's so many things, but probably to my mind, the most impactful was seeing how you two were as a couple. All the models of writers that exist when they're together in these passionate love affairs, which certainly the two of you shared, there are these models of envy and jealousy and competitiveness, all the bad movies about writers. And when you're 20 years old, this is what you see, and this is what you feel like this is how it's supposed to be. And then we saw you guys, and we met you guys, and it wasn't like that at all. All the good things, the faith in the art, the belief in the art, the belief in each other's art, all of that stuff was so much more important because we were a tremendous model for us.
One of the things that I really miss is the times when Patrick and I would say, hey, listen to this poem by a poet, and the library that you mentioned, pull the book off the shelf and read Hafiz or a Robert Haas poem or a Linda Gregg or P.K. Page poem to each other. And it was just such a treasure, I feel such gratitude that we had that. And we had similar taste in poetry. Usually we liked the same kind of poem. Usually we were thrilled with the same writers. So to have someone whose office shared a wall with mine, who I could trip over to and say, let's talk about this, was a delight. And I loved being in the room, in the audience when Patrick was reading. My heart would burst with pride, as you know, because you live with a brilliant writer and you are one yourself. Sometimes you forget they're brilliant because, that's the person who you say, look, it's your turn to make dinner tonight. I'm sick of cooking. Or you left breadcrumbs on the breadboard, or we have to get the washing on the line because it's the only sunny day for a week. That's the ordinary daily person that you share, that you break bread with. But then there's this other person. And I was stunned again and again being in the room when Patrick read from his novels or his books of poems, or when he talked about writing. I just thought, this man is a genius, and I'll forget it by Monday morning. But it was a thrill to keep rediscovering it in the 40 years that we had together. It was always a rekindling of my admiration for him.
And I know it was mutual. You know, the two of you, it's truly one of the great love stories, I think, of our time. Absolutely marvelous.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really surprised Essie and I across the 20 years we've been together is how hard it is to keep going as a writer in the face of all the things that come up.
Yeah.
And I wonder about you and Patrick. You know, you say one of you could have married an orthodontist or so on, but you know, I have this strong suspicion that, I mean, poetry is so tough. It's a difficult art. It's a bottomless art. And then the career of a poet, so difficult. And I suspect having the two of you together, going through that together, made all the difference.
It did. And thank God when one of us would get down about it, the other one wouldn't. You know, we managed to be on a teeter-totter. So when one of us hit the ground and got a big bang, the other one was fairly elevated. I think if we both hit bottom at the same time, I would not have wanted to be in the house or in the room. So, I mean, even to say the career of a poet is an oxymoron, isn't it? I think poetry, at the risk of sounding corny, really is a calling, because you know you're not going to make any money. You know your publisher's not really interested in getting your next book. It's not like a novelist where if you're selling well, they can't wait for the next volume to land on their desks. With poetry, it's like, oh, we expect to hear from you maybe every 3 years, and we're not pushing you to have a new book out in 3 years' time. So we both, I think, we're like yeast to each other's passion for what poetry means and what it could be to a life. When Patrick was working on his novels, he said it's just not as much fun as writing poems. It's real drudgery, right? I don't get the same feeling from writing a novel that I get from writing a poem. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Steve, but we both love the rush that you get when you're working in a very, very short space where the page is often bigger than the words that occupy it, where you have to condense and pressure so that something really inflammatory in the language starts to happen and ignite. And we were both addicted to it. And when there were downtimes, and there were many, the first 15 years we were together, we lived off our poetry wits, and that was difficult. You know, we lived on $14,000 Canada Council Writers in Residencies. So we moved all over Canada. We pack up every 8 months and move again. But it was a life that had many, many rewards. And I guess the biggest one was believing that language mattered and that you could go back to those 26 letters of the alphabet again and again and find something new and get closer and closer to the bone of what it is you want to say.
Right.
And that's poetry.
It is. You know, one of the things that I found interesting in reading this memoir was how many of the similarities I kept feeling and seeing in the prose of this with the qualities of your poetry. You know, like the clarity of vision, the humor, the accretion of concrete detail, the use of images, all of these things that I've come to feel emerge out of your poetry are right there in this prose. You know, but of course you're reminding me of how Patrick would grumble about writing long form fiction. Wait, was this as a long form prose work? Was this painful to work on?
How do I answer that? I worked on it as if I was working on a poem.
Right.
I have the feeling you do that with your novels too, because the language in your novels is so exquisite. I have Lampedusa and I have several dog-eared pages that I want to talk to you about how you reached that way of saying something or how you knew what you knew there. And I would write a sentence and then I would go back and read it and out loud 3 or 4 times until it felt right. And then I would move on. And then I would get the first page and I would go back and I would revise that first page as if I was just working on a 17-line poem. So, and it was oral for me too. The rhythm of each sentence was of crucial importance. So hence I had to hear my own voice reading it in the confines of my office. But I kind of like that. I mean, I think as a poet, you have to be obsessive compulsive, and that's what I was with this memoir. I was also aware, I guess, that there were some things that were going to be hard to say, but I think some of my favorite poems written by other people are about things that are hard to say. And if you aren't honest in a poem, I think it shows. I think inauthenticity shows. So I knew that I had to bear what I was really feeling in all circumstances, whether it was an admirable feeling or not, or it wasn't worth writing this. And I also feel that when I'm writing a poem, I'm trying to get at the pure form of me, but not the white coated part of me, but the essence of me. And that is both ugly and not admirable, as I hope sometimes reaching a kind of purity of articulation that makes the harder stuff easier for a reader to swallow.
You know, it's funny when you say that. You're talking about describing things that are complicated emotions or complicated reactions we might have, but there's nothing ugly in it.
Yeah.
You know? And there's something about the clarity of the truthfulness of the way you write about these things in your poetry, but in this memoir here in particular. Yeah. I never found, I always felt like the Lorna in this memoir was the Lorna I knew, which is amazing to me. Because whenever I've tried to write anything about myself, it always feels like such a version of myself. Like, I don't know how you did that. And I always felt like the Patrick that you were presenting was the Patrick that I knew, even though the things you were saying about yourself and about him were things that I hadn't heard before sometimes, or I'd heard a different story that was the same story, but somehow different because the details are different. It always felt so true and so right. I think that was partly what was so moving for me. But there was nothing ugly, no matter how raw the emotion or how complicated the scenario that you were describing, the fights you might have had, or the fiery passion that you guys shared, and you know, there was nothing ugly in it. And I think it was because it was so true, so honest, so sincere, so genuine, which of course is its own kind of artistry, especially in a memoir, is to somehow figure out how to make that happen. Yeah. Did you find it was difficult to decide what to include and what to leave out in this memoir? And were there things that it was too painful to include them, but too difficult to leave them out?
Yeah. Yeah, to the last question. You know, I started writing this in early 2017 when Patrick got out of his first long hospital stay, and when we both knew he was really ill, but in some ways weren't ready to face it yet. I guess we were full of hope at the time that the doctors would be able to come up with a diagnosis and with an effective treatment. And they didn't over a 3-year period of him deteriorating in front of my eyes. And when I started writing it, I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how I was going to be able to live. I'm going to get teary. Live with my fear, my worry that he was dying. And I thought, well, Lorna, the way you deal with things is you write about them. And I'm 72 now, So I was 69 when I started this. So for many, many years, at least 45 years, I've written out my angst and my joy and my wonder. And I thought I have to write out my fear. And so I would go into my office at the lowest of periods and start writing and say, how can I say this? How can I find words for what's now going on in our household and what's going on in my heart? And then I thought, I think I'd like to tell the story about how we met. I'd like to interweave this with our first coming together and how poetry started for me before I met Patrick. So those moments were kind of, if not comic relief, some other kind of relief to balance the fear and the worry and the illness with the story of our mad and crazy love affair and the story of our 5 cats. And I was able to read those pieces to Patrick. I'd say, hey, honey, listen to this. Here's a story about our cat Nolan. And he really loved those parts. He'd say, way to go, kid, keep on going. I didn't read him the parts where I was sad and working through what his and therefore my future were going to be. Those parts I kept to myself. But I read him the parts about our fights and our crazy incidents and all of our moving from city to city to city as we tried to stay alive as poets. And he told me to keep going with the book. I said, I'm balancing this. I'm interchanging it with what's going on right now. And he said, yeah, and I don't think I want to hear that. Yeah. And I said, no, I don't think I want to read it to you either. So I was not going to end the book on Patrick's death. I knew I was going to end the book on the death of our old cat, Vashel. And that was the November before Patrick died. Patrick died in March of the following year. And the book was going to end with him being alive and our second to last cat gone. And I hoped that at that point we would still be able to get him through this illness. But it wasn't to be.
Yeah. There's so much sadness in the memoir, but it doesn't read like a sad book.
Good.
I mean, there's heartbreak in it, but it's not a book about heartbreak. There's so much humor in it, and there's so much that's funny and alive and vibrant, and it feels like a celebration of life. It really, really and truly does. All of the elements and passages from your earlier years with Patrick and your years before Patrick felt to me like the education of a poet. It was the study of the education of a poet, but it was all essential. It was all absolutely vital in order to comprehend and understand the gravity, the enormity of what was passing in the present in this memoir. Mm-hmm. And it was all handled with such grace and such a light touch. I was hesitant to begin reading the book because, I knew I had to buckle up. Like this was going to be a challenging book to read as one of your dearest friends. And but I found it so cathartic. So cathartic. Mm. I can only imagine how wrenching it was for you to go through the writing of it and the editing of it. Yeah. But in some ways, I would hope that it was cathartic for you also.
This is the strange thing about being a writer, and I don't know if anyone who isn't a writer knows this. Even when you're writing the most painful things, there's joy in getting the rhythm right. There's joy in finding the absolute best adjective and avoiding cliche. There's joy in finding the detail that brings everything home. Right. So even when I was writing the sad stuff, I felt good about it. I felt renewed by the artistry, by being involved in the making of art. Where it was hard for me is I just finished doing the audiobook, and I could have had an actor read it, but Penguin Random House very hesitantly asked if I would do it, because apparently nonfiction books, if the author's a decent reader at all, people who buy audiobooks want the author's voice, not an actor. So I agreed to do it. And that's probably the most difficult literary task I've ever taken on. There are passages of this book I know I won't be able to read in front of an audience, whether it's online or Zoom or live. And you just don't, right? You just don't read those parts. But I had to read every single word with a producer's face from Toronto coming at me on a laptop, and the engineer outside of this little studio. And there were times where I had to say, I just can't do this. I can't, even the dedication, I couldn't get through the first day. And the dedication's a line and a half. So I'd have to take a sip of water and take 5 deep breaths and go for a little walk outside and come back in. So that was the hard part, not the writing of it, but the revisiting it orally for a professional reading that was going to be taped. The writing itself, ironically, brought me great joy.
Right.
And maybe if it doesn't, maybe it won't bring a reader joy. If it remains painful for the writer, maybe there's something going wrong there in the act of creation. I don't know. But I actually loved the writing of it, even when it was pretty painful stuff to find a way to articulate. And I almost feel guilty for saying that, but
Well, Patrick said to you, keep going, kid. Like,
yeah.
What a great gift, and what a great permission.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
What would you like to see Patrick's legacy be now in these years?
Oh, well, I've got Washita on my desk right now. I think it's one of the most brilliant books of poetry ever written. I understand that in Canada, after you die, your books don't sell very well, with a few exceptions. I hope Patrick will be the exception. I hope he'll be remembered most of all for his writing. The novels that he was able to get to late in his life, because he stopped drinking and he started to have the energy to do a major long piece instead of the short thing that poetry is. I'm hoping that's going to last, and his teaching. People like you.
Well, you guys have touched so many lives, so many poets all across the country, internationally. I mean, there's a web of lived writers' lives out there that are changed, that are different because of you guys. So thank you.
We feel so honored by that. So honored. So lovely to talk to you, Stephen.
Me too. You too.
I'm glad you're in the world as a writer and a human being.
Likewise.